Hey guys, tonight we're talking quietly about something you probably never questioned, ancient rules we obey without knowing why. This is a calm, late night history talk you meant for slowing your thoughts, not filling them. So before we begin, get comfortable, dim the lights, let this play in the background. If you enjoy quiet history like this, slow storytelling, no heavy editing, no sudden sounds, you can subscribe to the channel. This video is intentionally simple. No fast cuts, no loud moments, just a soft idea from the past unfolding slowly. Now let's begin. Most people assume rules exist because they make sense. That someone somewhere carefully thought them through and decided they were necessary. But history shows something else. Many rules came before explanations, before logic, before consent. People followed them not because they understood them, but because questioning them felt unsafe. In ancient and medieval societies, rules were absorbed quietly. No one gathered people together to explain why. You were shown how to behave and corrected when you didn't. A look, a warning, silence. That was enough. Over time, something subtle happened. Rules stopped feeling imposed, they began to feel natural. People stopped asking, why do we do this? And started saying, this is just how things are. And once a rule feels natural, it becomes invisible. Think about your own life. There are behaviors you follow automatically, not because they're written anywhere, but because breaking them feels wrong. That feeling has a history. Centuries ago, obedience was survival. Rules controlled movement, speech, appearance, and routine, not always for fairness, often for order, and order mattered more than understanding. As generations passed, the original reasons behind many rules disappeared. The fears that created them faded. The dangers they were meant to prevent no longer existed, but the rules stayed. Not because they were useful, but because they were familiar. This is why ancient rules still echo today. They weren't preserved deliberately, they were simply never removed. No one stood up and said, we don't need this anymore. So it remained. Tonight's story isn't about one law or one forgotten command. It's about how behavior outlives meaning, how obedience can survive long after its purpose is gone, and how the past continues to guide us quietly without ever asking permission. In the next part, we'll look at who benefited from these rules and why they were so carefully protected. But for now, just let the idea settle. Rules before reasons, habits before understanding. And as that idea settles, something else becomes clear. Rules don't survive because they are enforced every day. They survive because they are remembered without effort. Once a behavior becomes routine, it no longer feels like obedience. It feels like choice. And that illusion is powerful. In the past, no one needed to remind people constantly what was expected of them. Expectation lived in the air. It shaped posture, tone, timing. People learned when to speak and when to remain quiet. They learned what was acceptable without ever being told directly. Correction was subtle, a raised eyebrow, a pause that lasted too long, a silence that felt heavier than words. Over time, these signals trained behavior more effectively than punishment ever could. And because the training was quiet, it felt natural. That is how rules sink beneath awareness. They stop announcing themselves, they become instinct. By the time someone thinks to question them, the rule has already done its work. This is why ancient rules are so difficult to trace, not because they were hidden intentionally, but because they were never written clearly in the first place. They lived in repetition, in routine, in the simple desire to belong and avoid disapproval. Most people didn't follow rules to be good. They followed them to be safe. Safety came from predictability, and predictability came from doing what everyone else did. Generation after generation, this pattern repeated. Children copied adults. Adults corrected children, and the original reason slipped further into the background. Eventually, no one remembered the first moment the rule appeared, only that breaking it felt wrong, and that feeling, more than logic, kept the rule alive. As we move forward in this story, keep that in mind. Before power used rules openly, it relied on something quieter. Before control became visible, it became habitual. And before rules were defended, they were simply accepted. Let that thought stay with you as you listen, because once rules are accepted without resistance, something else quietly follows. They begin to serve someone, not openly, not obviously, but consistently. In ancient societies, rules rarely existed in isolation. They were woven into systems of power, tradition, and authority, and while most people followed them out of habit, a smaller group benefited from them through control. Power does not always announce itself. Often it hides behind routine, behind phrases like, "This is how it has always been." When rules feel ancient, they feel unquestionable. And when they are unquestionable, they become useful. Useful to institutions that needed order. Useful to leaders who feared instability. Useful to traditions that protected hierarchy. No single ruler had to invent every rule. Many were inherited, just like the obedience that came with them. Over time, these rules created clear boundaries: who could speak, who could decide, who could challenge, and who could not. The people at the top rarely needed to enforce these boundaries directly. The rules did that work for them, quietly, predictably. Those who benefited most were often the least visible. Religious authorities gained moral certainty. Political leaders gained social stability. Elites gained distance from those below them. And all of it appeared natural, because it had always been there. When a rule feels old, it feels legitimate, even if no one remembers who created it or why. Most people never saw these rules as tools, they saw them as reality. And reality, once accepted, is difficult to argue with. Questioning a rule was rarely framed as curiosity. It was framed as disrespect or danger or disorder. So questioning slowed, then stopped. Not because answers were given, but because silence was safer. This silence benefited those who already had authority, because authority grows strongest when it does not need to explain itself. Traditions helped with this. They wrapped rules in ceremony and meaning. They made obedience feel honorable rather than imposed. To follow the rule was to belong. To break it was to stand alone. And very few people wanted that. Over generations, this created a quiet agreement. Most people would follow, a few would benefit, and no one would speak too loudly about the imbalance, not because it was hidden, but because it was normalized. Rules did not need guards when people guarded themselves. They corrected each other, judged each other, reminded each other of what was acceptable. In that way, power became distributed and invisible. Those at the top rarely appeared responsible. The system simply seemed to run on its own. As you listen, notice how familiar this pattern feels. Not because history is repeating itself loudly, but because it never stopped whispering. Rules shaped behavior, behavior protected structure, and structure quietly served power without ever needing to say so. And once power learned it could rely on rules to maintain itself, it rarely needed force. Force draws attention. Rules do not. They settle into daily life, shaping actions without demanding notice. In many ancient societies, authority understood this well. The most effective control was not the one people feared, but the one they accepted. When a rule was followed by everyone, it no longer felt like control at all. It felt like common sense. And common sense is difficult to argue with. This is why traditions became so valuable. They gave rules a sense of age, and age gave them weight. A rule that had existed forever did not need justification, it simply needed continuation. Those who benefited from this system rarely appeared to be enforcing anything. They stood back, letting custom do the work. People corrected themselves before anyone else had to. They measured their actions against what was expected, not what was fair. Over time, this created a quiet alignment between power and habit. Rules shaped routine, routine shaped belief, and belief protected authority. No announcement was necessary, no explanation was offered. The structure held itself together through repetition alone. Even when circumstances changed, the rules remained. New generations inherited them without context. They learned what to do, not why to do it. And because they had never known another way, the rules felt neutral, unavoidable, almost invisible. This invisibility was their strength. A visible rule invites resistance. An invisible one feels like nature. Those who question it were often seen as disruptive, not thoughtful, as if they were disturbing something delicate and necessary. So most people adjusted instead. They learned where the boundaries were and stayed within them, not because someone stood guard, but because tradition had drawn the lines clearly enough. In this way, power did not need to act often. It only needed to wait. The rules would continue working long after the people who first benefited from them were gone. Authority, once embedded in habit, becomes self-sustaining. It no longer needs a face. It no longer needs a voice. It exists in expectation, in routine, in the quiet understanding of how things are supposed to be. As this part of the story unfolds, notice how little effort is required to keep such systems in place. They endure not through strength, but through familiarity. And familiarity, once established, is one of the most powerful forces history has ever known. And familiarity, once established, does something subtle. It whispers across generations. It travels quietly from parent to child, teacher to student, elder to friend. It becomes habit. And habits, once ingrained, are not easily undone. Rules that once guided survival now guide thought. The same rules that shaped medieval streets continue to shape modern routines. We follow customs without question. We adhere to norms without remembering why. Some are small, some are profound, and most are invisible, yet their influence is undeniable. Consider the habits you follow today, the ones so routine you rarely think about them. The gestures, the ways of speaking, the sense of what is acceptable. Many of them have ancestors in rules created long ago, rules that no one consciously enforces anymore, yet we obey them effortlessly. This is how the past lingers, not through force, not through proclamation, but through the quiet power of repetition. Culture works the same way. It carries values, behaviors, expectations, often unspoken. From one generation to the next, we inherit them like invisible architecture, shaping our choices before we even understand them. And just like architecture, the older it is, the more it defines the space. Even when we question a custom, we often find ourselves trapped by habit, unable to separate the rule from ourselves. Notice how easy it is to follow what feels normal. It requires no effort, it asks no questions, and that is why rules persist. Because humans are creatures of routine. Because breaking habit requires awareness, and awareness is rare. Because the mind prefers predictability, and yet there is no judgment here, no accusation, no moral lesson, only observation. These patterns exist simply because they can, because they are reinforced quietly, because each day, without thinking, we participate in the continuation of the past. Tonight, as you listen, let your mind slow. Let it drift along the current of centuries, tracing patterns older than memory. Consider how small actions ripple outward, how the invisible structures of habit guide the world without ever speaking. And recognize that obedience is not always conscious. That behavior can outlast logic, and habit can outlive its origin. Let your thoughts settle into this quiet understanding. The world we navigate today carries the echoes of countless invisible rules. Some guide us gently, like the rhythm of our daily routines. Some constrain us subtly, without our awareness. All of them remind us of the quiet persistence of human behavior. And now, as the story comes to a close, there is no grand conclusion, no dramatic reveal, no final judgment. Just reflection, just the recognition that we are shaped by patterns older than we realize, by rules that endure not because someone demanded them, but because they were never removed. Allow yourself to sink into the stillness of that thought, rules before reasons, habits before understanding, the past quietly guiding the present. And tonight, as you drift into sleep, let these whispers of history settle around you, soft and unbroken, leading you gently into rest. Allow your mind to follow the quiet rhythm of these enduring rules. Notice how they flow into the routines of daily life, the small gestures, the habits, the ways we measure ourselves against the expectations of others. We carry them unknowingly, like invisible threads weaving through each day. Even the smallest action repeated over time carries the weight of centuries. Think of the traditions that surround you. Some may seem comforting, some may feel restrictive. All are shaped by patterns older than memory, and all persist because we participate in them naturally, without thinking, without questioning. In this way, the past is never truly gone. It exists in the mundane, in the ordinary, in the quiet compliance of a morning routine, a social custom, a gesture we repeat automatically. It persists not because someone enforces it, but because it has been absorbed into the very fabric of how we move through the world. Tonight, as you listen, you are part of this continuation. You observe, you reflect, you participate simply by noticing. And there is no need for action, no need for judgment, just awareness. Let your thoughts drift to the subtle influence of habit, culture, and routine. Imagine them like gentle waves carrying the echoes of countless generations, each wave reshaping the shore of your present moment. They are quiet, unobtrusive, yet remarkably persistent. And in their persistence lies the true power of history, not in battles, not in proclamations, but in the simple, silent endurance of behavior. As you prepare to let go of the day and sink into rest, allow these reflections to settle around you. The rules, the habits, the invisible patterns, they are all part of a lineage that has guided human life quietly for centuries. And tonight, in the stillness of your room, they continue their gentle work. No conclusion is needed, no resolution is required. Just the soft acceptance that some patterns outlast understanding, and that the quiet persistence of the past guides us in ways we may never fully see. Let your mind slow. Let your breath settle. Let the quiet of history wrap around you, soft and unbroken. And as you drift into sleep, carry with you the gentle reminder, rules before reasons, habits before understanding, the past quietly guiding the present, and in that quiet, let yourself rest.